if you had a great attitude but didn't do any behavior and your technique was poor, okay, you're still going to fail, right?
Hello Sales Nation and welcome to today's episode of the Salesman Podcast. On today's show we have Dave Mattson. He is the CEO over at Sandler Training. And on today's episode we're diving into the Sandler Success Triangle. It consists of behavior, attitude and technique. And Dave shares why behavior is probably the thing that needs to come first, even though we're all focusing on technique. Dave's new book, Sandler Rules for Sales Leaders, is available on Amazon. We link to everything else that we talk about in the show notes to this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And with all that said, let's jump in to today's show. Dave, welcome to the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks for having me, Will.
I'm glad to have you on, sir. We've talked about Sandler on many shows in the past, and we've had a bunch of your team on the show in different places throughout the couple of years that we've been running. So it's great to have yourself on and to perhaps dive into this into even more detail than we have in the past. And there's one element of Sandler Training that I want to focus on today, and we'll start with this and we'll see where we go. And that is the Sandler Success Triangle. So this is behavior, attitude, and technique, and how this all pulls together to have success in sales in particular. So where I want to start with this is we cover all these elements all the time on different episodes, but we've never looked at the bigger overall picture of how they interact, perhaps, if we want to put it that way. How much of each do we need to have success in sales? Can we have success if we are 99, if we're crushing it 99% in the behavior side of things, but we have a terrible attitude and average technique? Or is it more efficient for us to be 70, 80% in all of them?
I mean, it's a good question. So it's a triangle because I think you should have all three, right? It's not a two-legged stool. Those tend not to work. If you had a great attitude but didn't do any behavior and your technique was poor, okay, well, you're still going to fail, right? Same with behavior. If you didn't do the behavior, but you're great at technique for the 2 prospects or customers you talk to a year, that's not enough either. So you need a healthy balance of all of them. And I think by default, Will, most people tend to gravitate towards awesome technique. If I could be great at this talk track or this objection handling or this script, that will get me through everything. And it only is a small spike of success, but then you're going to go right back to where you were.
You've took the words out of my mouth here. One of the following questions, the follow-up questions I was going to ask was, why is sales training typically, and this has been my experience internally in the companies I've worked for in sales roles, it is 100% focused on product, features and benefits, and then sales technique. Is that because they're just the easiest things to perhaps have on a whiteboard and to talk about?
I think so, and I think oftentimes most training organizations don't put them all together. So we try to, make our claim to fame in the training world, not Sandler, but in general, hey, we've got awesome technique. But the issue, as you say, is that people will learn the techniques, and then maybe 30 days later they go right back to what they're accustomed to doing. So why is it? There was no behavioral change and there was no mindset change. If you think about exercise or dieting, it's the same darn thing. Everyone goes and sets goals until probably February 1st, and they're right back to what they were doing last year because there was no mind shift, there was no behavioral change. You got to get those things done. And to your point, if you said, hey, we have attitude training today, we'd like to invite you, no one shows up. No one shows up for that. And so what we tend to do at Sandler is we have awesome tactics and strategies, and then we say, this is how you have to shift the way you think, and here's how you behave. But we lead with technique because people are more willing to accept it, and then we sneak in the other ones after they say. Now, if you've been in Sandler for a while, you understand the value of behavior and attitude because you know that that's what's going to sustain your growth and perpetuate this new behavior that you've done. But in the beginning, we give you technique, and then we kind of slip in behind with the attitude.
Okay, well, let's take technique off the table for today's conversation. And I know my audience is skewed in that if they are downloading a podcast like this and listening to it near daily, they're probably already on board with the fact that they've got to go beyond just what email subject line they've got to use or how they write stuff in a script before they make a call. So I appreciate my audience are probably not representative of everyone in sales. They're probably the top performers, and then the people who want to become the top performers. So let's take technique away, and let's focus on attitude and behavior for a second. Does one have to come before the other, or are they interchangeable in how we should focus? And I'll give you the context of, you're a salesperson listening to this, you're on the way to a sales meeting, or you're on the way to the office, and you want to focus on one element from this podcast. We want to give them some practical tips. Should attitude come before behavior, or are they interchangeable?
Well, my opinion is that behavior actually controls attitude. We don't wake up one day and say, if it's raining, hell, I don't want to go jogging today, or hey, today's going to be a great day. I mean, in the mindset stuff, attitude, success resides right between your ears most of the time. And there's a million things on the positive and negative side about mindset. But when it comes to behavior, if you would do the behaviors on a daily basis, it actually changes your attitude. And I think that's really what we have to work on. People try to work on their mindset first without behavior, and they stall. And so if you had to pick one, I would pick behavior, because it will ultimately shift over to your attitude. And you may not even realize it, but it happens in your daily life, on your personal side, and it'll happen on your business side. So if you had to pick one, Will, I would go with behavior.
Because I didn't know you were going to go with that, but I totally agree. And I think this is something that's missed. I've had other people go on the show before, and the guest is the expert. I'm only here to pull insights out, but we've gone back and forth on a couple of ways of why other guests have thought attitude, or however you want to label it, mindset comes before the actual steps in your day, the process side of things. And I agree it's the other way around. And I know from the growth of the podcast, if I focus on, right, every day I've got to put out a podcast, as opposed to, and regardless, that's it. That's the rule. There's no option. There's no option. That right. Then forces me to, whether I'm miserable or whether I'm, loving editing these videos in the moment, or I'm loving kind of going back and forth, or someone's cancelled or whatever it is. It makes a lot of that almost redundant. It makes a lot of that, like, in the moment it's important, but then 5 minutes later it becomes even more insignificant than what it really is as well.
Yeah, I think that's true. And I think if most salespeople do not have a daily behavioral plan, and so they rely on being reactive, and we'll take technique off, but we also have the ups and downs of the day. I mean, listen, let's face it, sales, we lose more than we win, right? I mean, that's just how it works. That's not how it works in most other parts of the business world, but it certainly works here in sales. And if salespeople would create, whether it's a prospecting plan or a daily cookbook or recipe for success, a behavioral plan, they will far be more successful. And I even think for sales leaders, if they would work on behavioral plans, because look, you can only do things that you can control. I can't control outcomes, whether people say yes or no to me. I can't control the outcome, whether somebody gives me an appointment, regardless if my technique is awesome. But I can control my own daily behavior. And I also think that's where people fall short of taking their corporate goal and their personal goal. What they don't end up doing, unfortunately, is link, what do I have to do every single day in order to hit that goal? They worry about the end result, which I cannot control. I can't control whether I've got a 12 million quota. I can't control that part, whether who says yes and who says no, but I can control my daily behaviors and activities in order for me to get to that number. And that's the magic, really.
And this reduces your levels of stress as well, doesn't it? If you've worked backwards from your end goal, and your pipeline is full, and you know that you've got to make X many calls a day and so many meetings, and you just plod away at it, it takes a lot of the negativity, the stress, and the parts of sales that we all hate doing away from the whole mix, and even just away from the conversation.
Well, absolutely. It'll help you take away the stuff in the funnel that shouldn't be there, because you don't have it. Because if you're always behaving properly in the front of the funnel and doing all the things on a behavioral basis in the middle of the funnel, then it's much easier for me to disqualify. Let's do that. And then the mindset of being reactive all the time, where they ask you for free consulting, you jump, you do this, I jump. Well, I'm jumping because I don't even have a process. But if I had a daily behavioral plan, to your point, and I know I'm doing all the things necessary in all aspects of my business, because think about it, we've got in the types of businesses that we're in, there's so many balls that we have to juggle. By default, we tend to go to the ones that we're comfortable with. And so if I had a hunting and farming, let's say, portion of my job where I've got to go sell net new business and I've got to create ongoing relationships where we're selling additional products and services. If I had a fear of cold calling or rejection or something over there, then I tend not to do as much of the hunting part because I've rationalized all of the farming and relationship building side. So I'm healthy on one side and I'm not healthy on the other side. And sales leaders always struggle with this, where I hit part of my quota on a product, but not the other. That's where the stress resides, because I don't necessarily know. I'm anxious because I don't know what it really does take every single month or day in order to hit my number. And that lowers the stress, to your point.
I guess thinking about it as we're talking, it'll take away some of these ups and downs within sales as well. Because in my experience, at the end of every year, in every role I've ever had, and my targets are always year to year. There was always a mad panic to close those last 2 or 3 deals that just put you've usually had hit target by a month or so before, and they're just pushing you into the decent bits of bonus and commission. I guess if you're doing things throughout the year, it eliminates some of that as well.
There's 2 things to your point. I think one, you get to self-diagnose. You know if you're on track, if you're not on track. I mean, I don't have to look at my number and say X amount behind on my quota. I mean, I see that, right? And so if I'm not getting the results, I need to tweak different parts of my behavioral plan. And that may be, in different parts of the sales process. So that's one. 2, the ups and downs. It's 100% true. Most people spend 6 months trying to find the business and 6 months nurturing the relationship after the fact. And it's feast or famine. If you want to have a steady increase or whatever it is, consistency, let's do it that way. The only way to get that done is through that behavioral plan. Otherwise, you will be a victim of the ups and downs. And you're going to be a hostage to, whatever's in the funnel you're going to try to save, as you indicated, just because you need to close your numbers. You need to get the year end. And there's a massive push at the end, which I never understood. We train 31,000 new people a year. And the biggest thing that they find when it comes to the behavioral plan is less stress, right? And the second is they hit their goals about a quarter ahead of time because they actually have done all the things necessary up to that point.
So I want to come on to what a daily behavioral plan is, what it looks like, and hopefully we can show the audience how they can, somewhat build one in the small amount of time that we've got to kind of discuss it here, Dave. But before that, just for a bit of context for the audience, because I know a lot of Sales Nation are B2B salespeople, and there's a whole bunch of leadership in there as well. But for all the salespeople, do you become a better prospect internally for other opportunities, for an easier ride and not having your sales manager on your back if you do all of this planning? So to kind of go to the word that you used of you're consistent with your results, is that a nicer person to manage from a sales manager perspective? Someone who they can track the results throughout the year, and then they know that they're going to hit target at the end, versus what I've always done, which is always done so-so at the end of the year, closed a huge deal, had my manager on my back for 12 months, and then he's my best friend at the end of the day, at the end of the kind of like year when I closed that one big account. Is the consistency what they want from you as well? From
a sales leader's perspective?
Yep.
Yeah, well, let's just, sales leaders, we ultimately are judged based on, did we hit our revenue goal or we didn't? So that's how we're judged, and that's what we're responsible for doing, is driving revenue. If I'm a sales leader and I have team member A who has taken the quota that I've given them, we've broken it down to what they need to do, a recipe for success, then I can help them from a coaching, a training, mentoring standpoint. Because if I know that they're doing the behaviors, but the outcome isn't right, then there's only one of 2 reasons. One, the behavior is not enough, right? We're not doing enough of the behavior, so we have to do more of that. So we need to dial it up. Or our technique is poor. If you're doing the behaviors, but the outcome's not there, then we know there's a breakdown somewhere, and it would be easy to see. So if I'm doing X amount of net new contacts, but I'm not getting the appropriate amount of first calls, then something is wrong in your call, or something's wrong in your email, or whatever, however we're prospecting. It's much easier for me as a sales leader to pinpoint exactly where I could help you. That's magical. The other thing that sales leaders don't really know is, what are salespeople doing every single day? The only way that I'm judging and talking to you is about deal specific issues. Where are you with XYZ? what's going on with ABC, because that's what you've tracked and that's what's in the CRM and that's in the pipe. But if I could go one step back, then this I still will always do. How can I help you close more business as a sales leader? Of course. But if I can do this in dealing with the behavioral stuff up front, much easier for both sides. And as a salesperson, I benefit too, because then I get your wisdom of the 20 years or 10 years or whatever your experience level is as a sales leader to help me, because now you know exactly where to help me.
And I guess this is, again, leadership down. It wouldn't be perhaps something that an individual B2B salesperson would implement. But are there any software solutions that help track all this, or any CRMs that prompt you to make those 10 calls and those 15 emails every morning, and then allows you to forecast forward on your behaviors versus your results, if that makes sense?
Sure. We have personally one at Sandler. It's called Sales Accountability. And it takes where it helps you identify what your quota or goal is. So you have to input that portion of it. And then it says, let's create your cookbook. And then it breaks it down to what you need to do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis. And within about 2 minutes a day, you get to actually track where you are against your goal. It's also gamification. So as a sales leader, I then get to see where the dashboard of where my people are doing from a behavioral standpoint. I can see who's not doing their behaviors, who's shying away from the hunting and only doing the farming, if I use that analogy. And then I also get to have behavioral contests. Hey, let's have, how many net new conversations can we do as a team this month? And you can have little contests, and I can then compete against Will. Salespeople are competitive, right? If I know that everybody sees what I'm doing, I tend to up my game. So there's a lot of things going on, but it's called sales accountability. That's the only one I found so far.
That makes total sense. And it seems like, I don't know, you can turn this into a product pitch if you like, but I don't know how far that goes, but it's almost, it gives you all the data for sales leadership to coach people as well of, Will's doing amazing on the behavioral side of things, but Tanya, I don't know why that name's come into my head, but Tanya, I don't even know her Tanya. Tanya is doing X, Y, Z on the technique side of things. She is closing the same amount of deals with less behavior. So Tanya, can you work on the behavior, and Will, can you work on, go back and forth and team up and build a partnership there?
That's
interesting.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
But you also get to see the fact that, hey, I, as Tanya, may or may not be doing as much of the activities or behaviors that Will is doing. And even if Will is more successful in certain areas, I can be told from a sales leader, hey, you need to up your activity base. But when I see others on the team doing that, I will up my game naturally. You don't even have to tell me. I'm going to up it. Now, if my results are better, to your point, then people will look at me and say, hey, how are you doing that? Now we've got best practices. We can create playbooks internally, because obviously I'm doing something right if my numbers are doing it. Now, there's something called the comfort zone. People do get into the comfort zone. The longer people are in the industry, for whatever reason, there's a million reasons for comfort zones. But, sometimes our technique is we are good at it, but we tend to do less behavior. And, sales leaders always say, oh my gosh, if Dave would just up his activities, we could get 50, 60% more productivity out of Dave. But how do I get that done? And that's really what the behavioral plan will help me do, because I inch out of my comfort zone and do more and more. And the end result is the win for me personally as a salesperson and for you as a sales leader.
Makes total sense. Okay, so Dave, let's get super practical here. Let's give the audience a true real life takeaway so that you can implement something into their own game after this episode and change the way they're doing things. So I think we can do this through, if you can give us an overview of what a daily behavioral plan is, then perhaps I can quiz you on the specifics of it, and we can see if we can give our audience that takeaway of perhaps what they should be seeing in the diary, if that's how it works, every time they wake up and sit in front of the laptop, and rather than replying to emails reactively, they've got an insight and a plan to move on with the day.
I mean, in essence, it's really reverse engineering your numbers, your quota. And so if you say, hey, I need X amount of sales at the end of the year, You would then say, okay, how many sales is that? How many presentations would I need? And you go right down your sales funnel until you get to the point where how many net new conversations do I need? Everybody manages and focuses on, I need X amount of presentations and X amount of customers in order to hit my number. That's way at the end. That's lagging. If you go into the front end, then it's how many, let's just say, how many net new opportunities or conversations do I need to have? And how many do I need LinkedIn referrals? How many of this do I need? And that's on the front end. So let's do a quick practical example if I could. Do you mind?
No, go for it.
Let's do the front end, and let's talk about a prospecting cookbook. We call it a cookbook or a recipe for success. It's a behavioral plan. Your listeners should be able to answer the following questions. How many net new conversations do you need in a given week or month in order for you to hit your numbers? Net new. Now, you could say, well, I only call on existing customer bases, which me too, I do too. But I could have a net new within the organization, or I could have a conversation with, let's say you, Will, on a net new opportunity, whatever the case may be. So it works for both. And once you have that number, now in my business, we've got 400 Sandler trainers. I know my number is 2 per day. I need 2 net new conversations per day in order for that to drive through the funnel to do extremely well. Now, of course, the end result is better or worse depending on my technique, but let's just do the 20. That's my first aha moment that most sales reps cannot answer. How many net new conversations do you need in a given month or week in order to hit your number? Step number 2, I would come up with the top 5 prospecting avenues. Where do your leads come from? Is it a LinkedIn? Is it referral base? Is it cold calling? Is it email? Whatever the case may be. I know mine, we have about 47 different ways that we could go to market. But I also know, based on my personality type, I'm introverted. Networking meetings take a lot of energy for me. Talk to total strangers. I can do it, but it's not as productive as other things. So that's step 2. What are your top? Step 3. If I know my number is 2 a day, so let's just say that I need 10 a week, right? So I need 10 a week of net new conversations. I know my top 5 referral or my lead sources. And so let's just say it's LinkedIn. Let's say it's customer referrals. Let's say it's strategic alliances and outbound calls. My next step is to put a number to each one that would equal 10. So I may want 3 from LinkedIn, 2 from existing customer referrals, 1 from outbound calls, whatever it is. But once you put that number to it, Will, now I can then manage that number. That's my cookbook. My cookbook says I need X amount from LinkedIn, if I use that as an example. And I can now self-prescribe, because if I go through the month and I don't have my number, I can say, wow, I've completely forgotten to do my front end. And again, this is only the front end example. And I can then adjust. So I got to go back and get more of that, versus saying I'm going to work on the end result, which is my sales on the back end. On this example, if I did my upfront behavioral stuff, then I know if I got 2 a day, 2 net new, and I know where they're coming from, I know my metrics will end up working out. Now, if I take a bigger picture, as I said, all you have to do, and it's okay to switch your behaviors and activities. It's okay if you switch those words. But what do I have to do throughout the process? So let's take some other things. Do I have to spend, two opportunities per day or 2 conversations per day with net new, and I need 3 with existing customers? So you can start to juggle all the things that you have to do based on your sales process and based on what you have to do every single day. It's like a recipe. Let me give you a quick example. My mom had great spaghetti sauce, and I thought it was so simple to do. And so I just went in and started throwing a bunch of stuff, but it never actually tasted the same. And every time I did it, I did something slightly different, which is true in sales. Isn't that how salespeople do it? They do it's different each and every time. I'm trying to replicate something. But what I ended up doing is I finally had to ask my mom for the recipe. And once I understood what the recipe was, I got to follow it. The end result was very predictable. And then I could, of course, I have 5 children, based on their tastes, I could tweak it, but it was easier to edit that recipe. And once I followed it, I got a consistent output. And that's true in sales as well. We tend as salespeople to look at the sauce or look at what other people are doing. We don't know exactly what they're doing from a behavioral standpoint, and we tend to wing it. And we get away with it in sales, but that's really what it is. You just you reverse engineer your sales funnel to the point where you know exactly what you should be doing in different aspects of your business every single day.
So assuming here, and this is a huge assumption, that we know that our funnel is pretty seamless, we know that we have somewhat good technique, we're not going to be making huge mistakes that obviously then that skews all the data. So assuming that everything is going to go somewhat to plan, the best that it can in B2B sales, should our focus then be on doing, not doing nothing, but having the number one priority, just to simplify it, perhaps one email outreach a day that connects and one LinkedIn outreach that connects and brings people into the funnel? Should that be our one priority? Should we drop everything else to make that happen? If it's Tuesday and we've only done one out of those, should we stay late on Tuesday night to make it happen to catch up for the day before? Should we be as religious about it as that?
So there's a couple things. Should you drop everything else to get that done? No, that's not what the cookbook says. You should not drop all the other things that are important just to do the things that you're behind on or that you want to do. That's what gets into this trouble. However, you should be on goal time, not clock time. If it's Thursday and you've hit all your behavioral goals, hey, guess what? If you need a Friday afternoon, take it off. But you should never leave on a Friday afternoon if you have not done your behavioral goals, because what have you done? You've kind of skirted the issue. And I would say to you, people get to celebrate each and every week, each and every day when they do a behavioral plan, because I don't get to celebrate sales that often because maybe I'm on a 7-8 month selling cycle. So we don't high five, one another every day. But if I do the behaviors every day, I feel good about it. It's a win for me. It's awesome. And I've taken that step to success. Let's do jogging. I'm not a big jogger. I hate jogging. And, if I didn't jog today, to your example, I would say, okay, well, I'll do it tomorrow. And if I didn't do it tomorrow, then what would happen when I got to Friday? You know what I would say? I'm not going to do the 20 miles that I was supposed to do. So I'm just going to scrap it and I'll do it next week. And I push it off. And that's what salespeople do. But if you do it every day, then to your point, what happens if you don't do it? I think you need to up it by the end of the week. You have to adjust and say at the end of the week, I got to hit those weekly behavioral goals, even though I missed my Tuesday. And that's true, Will, if you're with a customer all day. I spend a lot of time on site with customers, and I don't get the opportunity to do parts of my funnel. But so, for instance, one of my behavioral plans is I call on the way home. I have a commute. I call 5 customers every day. And I call them every day. Now, if I'm off site, I may not get that done. But when I get back to the hotel, I will make those calls. So I fit it into my day. What I don't use as an excuse is, oh, I'm off site. Oh, I can't do this. At the end of the week, all I'm doing is I'm hurting myself. So if I want to be successful, I will self-manage myself to get that done and don't allow myself to get sucked up with all the excuses, which are valid sometimes. I get it, but you're going to have to do it. Now,
let me just stop you a second, Dave. So we'll use these calls as an example because this is a great example. Clearly, salespeople could do exactly the same as what you're doing, of call on their good customers, offer them some kind of conversation, whatever context we want to put it in. So I think that works. Now, for you specifically, and this won't be for everyone, but I think this is a point that we can drill into a little bit deeper. Is that a habit that you've set that when you don't do it, you go, right, I've got to get this done, otherwise I can't wrap up for the day? And there's a lot of subconscious processing going on in there that is got to achieve this goal, otherwise I'm going to feel bad about myself. Or are you self-correcting and using willpower to force yourself to do these calls?
I think it's both. Or is it half empty or half full? I mean, to me, I tend to do the guilt thing. So if I don't do it, I know that's the number, then I just find that unacceptable, because once you actually know the number, Will, then I'm exposed. I have to end up doing it. It's when I don't know the number that I have to do, then I don't feel too guilty about it. I say, oh yeah, I'll make those calls tomorrow. But if I knew I had to do 5, now it's up to me. So I have to look at myself in the mirror. For me, it's guilt. You know better. Hey, listen, step up, buddy. And so that's how I do it. Now it's different for others, but I also know the outcome of those calls, because only a couple things, and we're not doing tactics, but when you do those calls, there's only about 4 things that could happen. All of them are great. So why shy away from it?
The reason I ask this is that and I'm perhaps guilty of it as well. But I think there's a lot of this trend in the world at the moment of like life hacks and just set habits, and then you don't have to think about it, and it all comes to you so easily. People are obviously looking for a magic bullet with a lot of this. But I know myself, I've got a bunch of habits that I set every day, and after 60, 90 days, they become easier. But I still have to talk to my brain, and I don't know what's going on here. There's a weird disconnect of when you talk at yourself, it seems to be a feedback loop that goes into somewhere else in your brain and quiets the dumb part of it that's telling you to just watch YouTube and chill out for an hour because you've worked hard all day, or whatever your vice is. And so I just wanted to like double down on that because I've never met anyone who has success that has had it on the back of habits and they've just flown through it all like beautifully and easily. It all comes on the back of hustle and hard work and willpower and not holding yourself to a higher standard. Perhaps that is a better way to describe it, because that's what you're doing there. You said you feel guilty about it. It's because your standards are up here. And if you don't do the work, you're below there, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think also, for us, I let down the company, I let down my family, I let down myself. And once you realize what's the why of why you're working, then you really do know it's not just to hit your numbers. It's really to get whatever it's your bonus plan or your commissions. Let's just be self-centered as a sales rep for a second. And that, therefore, in turn, means that I get to send my kids to this university and I get to do this and I get to do that. That will drive me. That drives me. And when I have those things printed, then as you said, you look and think, there is no magic water. If I could just do the behaviors and just say, hey, listen, I don't care how I feel about it and my technique will be bad or good, it'll work itself out. That's not true. That's not how it works in the real world. I wish it did, because I would be a professional golfer. I mean, I practice enough. It's just not happening for me.
Amazing. I think, and we can wrap up with this, Dave, in that I think you just summed this up really nicely. And this is how, even what I'm doing now and the deals that I'm putting together for partnerships and the ad buys on the audio side of the podcast and the live events and everything that we're doing, I have to treat myself as if I'm like a 7-year-old child. And I'm not capable of going, well, if you do all this big picture stuff, you'll get that deal, which leads to, a nice car or, the watch, or taking my partner away and going doing whatever, or, retiring early, whatever it is, obviously it's endless, the possibilities. I have to treat myself like a 7-year-old and go, well, if I do this one thing over and over and over, that's how I get the success. I have to chunk it down so much that literally I have to record so many podcasts a week. I have to then get them edited. I have to get them back from the editors. I have to upload them. There's no like wishy-washy of if you do so many a month and you just get a little bit ahead of yourself every month. I'm behind the camera here. There's literally a whiteboard with a diary essentially that printed on it that has the shows that are coming out. And if I don't have that 2 or 3 week kind of pathway, you're scrambling. I get stressed, but it's the only time I get stressed for anything. And so that's I have to dumb it down as much as I can to get any benefit from any of this. And with that, Dave, go on.
No, I was going to say, hey, listen, we're all, adults are little kids in big people clothing, to your point. We do have, and we can say dumb it down, but I do think we have to chunk it down so it's palatable for us to do, especially for the things that we don't want to do. You got to chunk it down or it's not going to happen. So what you're doing, if everybody did, we would all be in this profession far more successful than we currently are.
For sure. Makes total sense. And I think you've given a lot of context to this, because I've had sales managers who've been, well, treat your territory. I had a regional territory that I was physically driving to with my medical device sales roles. They would treat it like it's your own little business, like you're the entrepreneur. And when someone says that to me, I think, right, we're going to do all this crazy, awesome stuff, and I'm going to be really innovative, and I'm going to change the game of how we do this. And obviously, that's my entrepreneurial flair that I didn't necessarily realize I had before I got into doing the podcast and growing this audience and all that kind of thing, and the marketing side of things. But that was what I took away from the conversation. But what they were really saying, but were not perhaps saying it very well, was you need to do what we've discussed today, of treat it like it's your business, but imagine that there's 10 of you going around perhaps doing all these little jobs, and then focus down into those specifics. So I think you've had a lot of context to the conversation of that today here, Dave. And I've got one final question that I ask everyone that comes on the show. And that is, if you could go back in time and speak to your younger self, what would be the one piece of advice you'd give him to help him become better at selling?
I would give myself the advice of have a process down, and that is create a sales process and not wing the sales process, but also create the process for a behavioral plan, because I think everything else comes into place. Those are the things that I would do.
Clearly, like what you're doing now, heading up Sandler, when did that become apparent to you? When did you realize that a plan was, because it makes your life easier, essentially. You're putting a little bit of work up front to give yourself process to do everything that we described in today's episode. When did that become apparent to you that this could be, advantageous to, yourself and then everyone else that you're working with as well?
Well, I was a client. I mean, I thought hard work would create success. And if I outworked you, then I would be more successful than you. And as a client, then that was really a knock on the side of my head when I realized that's not really true. I need to work smarter than harder. And once I changed how I did it, then I had the conviction and the confidence to say, I did it. I eat my own dog food. Mm-hmm. This is helpful. And then when I watched clients, because I've been at Sandler for 30 years, and I became David Sandler's partner in 1994, and just have continually buying more and more of the company. And when I see and hear testimony after testimony after testimony of how I become the number one salesperson, or how I had no sales experience and I just blew away my numbers, or I got out of my comfort zone that I was stuck at for 5 years, then you realize that this success triangle, there's a ton to it. And we're awesome at the technique stuff, but it's the attitude behavior things that make people just go right to the top. And that's what got it for me. When I experienced it and then I see it, and I just, even as a sales leader, I do what we talked about, which I manage the cookbook. I know the numbers will come, and if not, then I'll manage the cookbook so the numbers do come. And so it's just made my life easier, Will.
Amazing. I could feel you getting lit up then, and there was a spark then, there was a passion behind it. So I appreciate that, Dave. It means that this is a legitimate thing and a problem that I have on the show occasionally, and those shows don't make it out. But I could tell that you really believe that, and you really care about it. So that's awesome. And with that, tell us about the new book, which is going to be clearly suitable for sales leaders that are listening. And then I believe you've got an offer for us as well.
Yeah, so we've got the 49 rules for sales leaders, and it really came from the 49 rules for salespeople. And we don't teach a lot of scripts because I don't think people remember scripts, but they remember like guardrails, right? GPSs. If you can handle this situation this way, the words will come. And so we had such success with the 49 rules for salespeople, we created the rules for sales leaders, and it takes them through all aspects of their business. Many sales leaders will come into this position without any prior training or experience. So we kind of learn by fire, right? So we've got to figure that out. And that's what this does. And to your point, I'd love to offer any of the listeners, hey, go to Sandler.com, check us out, pick a training location, call them up and be our guest, from just being part of your group. Just say, I listened to Dave and Will, and I'd like to come and just sit in on the day. You can, as my guest, just sit in and absorb as much as you can. If I never see you, it's okay. I promise you will be much better. We'll give you the success triangle, if it's attitude, behavior, technique, and whatever course you choose to participate in. Could be sales leadership, could be prospecting. It's up to you.
Amazing stuff. Well, we'll link to all that in the show notes of this episode over at salesmanpodcast.com. And with that, Dave, I want to thank you for your time, your insights on this. Well, clearly, if you're up for it, we'll have you back on to dive into the other areas of the sales triangle in the future. And with that, I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Thanks, Will.